Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We will be exploring privacy as a workforce capability problem, not just a policy or a training issue. We've all observed many times in our work that privacy initiatives really fail because leaders don't care. They fail because capability blind spots tend to stay invisible until there's an incident. So today we'll cover three things. Firstly, where privacy initiatives actually fail. Secondly, what it means to build privacy as workforce capability. And finally, we'll talk about what good skills visibility looks like and how SFIA and a skills platform can help with that. We'll keep our discussion practical and leadership focused, so there are some great useful takeaways for you. So quickly to introduce ourselves, my name is Marianne. I'm the Head of Client Success at the Digital Skills Agency, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion between Daniel Merriott. Give us a wave, Daniel. Daniel is Managing Director at the Digital Skills Agency, and Paul Collins. Give us a wave, Paul. Paul is the CEO of SkillsTX. I'll be off camera most of the time, so we keep the focus on the two of you, Daniel and Paul. And let's start off with a bit of a question. So tell me, just in one sentence each, what lens are you bringing to this privacy conversation today? Let's start with you, Paul.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Marianne, for setting this up. And yeah, the lens I'm going to bring to it is going to be from a systems perspective. Obviously, privacy, a big deal wherever it is, but the fact that we have a solution, that we've got to bring that solution to the market with a privacy lens. And of course, any organization that's implementing systems that obviously needs to have that sort of mindset around either systems that you use, commensurate or working to the level that you need as far as privacy and data protection is concerned. So a little bit techie.
Well, we need a bit of that. Thanks, Paul. How about you, Daniel? What's your perspective on today's conversation?
So I'll take a workforce planning and a capability perspective, but I also have a background in information security and some of the more technical aspects of privacy. So I'll try and bring those in as best I can too.
Thanks very much, both of you. All right, well, let's dive into our conversation. So we want to start with the first point, which is where do privacy initiatives actually fail? So let's start with a bit of a statement from each of you. So starting with you, Daniel, can you tell me in 1 minute, why do you think privacy programs tend to fail in practices, even when organizations have policies and training behind it?
My experience has been that people tend to see the challenges from the domain they're most familiar with. So if you're an information security person, you see privacy as an information security problem. If you're a data person or a legal person, you see it from that perspective. And I think it's important to note that privacy is not the same thing as security. It governs whether, why, and how you collect and use personal data. Information security is actually more concerned with governing how that data is protected.
Thanks, Daniel. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I certainly concur with that. I sort of summarize it really. It's someone else's problem. We have documentation that describes it, and a little bit like quality control sometimes, it's like, yeah, someone else will look after that. I'll just get on and do my things without really understanding that it's really a cultural thing to some degree. So, I know we'll get into discussing skills, but that, taking it seriously across the whole organization, your own data and your own privacy, right through to, other people's for that matter. And I know we'll cover that when we get into that a little bit in terms of permissions and who can see what when we get into that system side. So that would be my take.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, we all know that taking it seriously is something that's front of mind for a lot of people. And Daniel, you've spoken before about how leaders often don't see what their capability blind spots are until an incident actually happens. Can you tell us what are the 2 or 3 blind spots you tend to see most often?
Yeah, I'll give you a generic one and a more specific one. So generically, we see a lot of people leaders without the time to actually invest in managing their people and their professional development. So that can have a real impact in terms of integrating good privacy practices into how the team works. More specifically, what we tend to see is IT teams tend to have good data management skills, but very few of them are focused on information management. And then we see from the business side, typically they have a better understanding of information management, perhaps not so good on the data management, data engineering side. So there are gaps that can be plugged by working better together, but of course that's not the only challenge.
What do you find the impacts of those blind spots tend to be?
It can be that people work in silos because it's more comfortable. So techies working with techies, or business teams not involving techies, that's definitely something we see. But we also can see that it means that people with the right expertise aren't always involved. So not always getting a privacy expert or an information security expert involved in the design of systems and applications, and then treating it as a bolt-on, which I think was one of Paul's earlier points.
Paul, what's your experience of that?
Yeah, the blind spots bit is interesting. I made a couple of notes, little, 3-word grabs, because that's the world we live in these days. And the first one is policy is a document, capability lives in people. And it touches on a little bit of what Daniel was saying there. And it's my next point, training is a moment. We ticked a box, you did the training, job's done, but no, that isn't. It's got to be then applied and woven into the work you do, for want of a better description. Saying we have a policy and we've done the training is easy to count. Measuring how well you do privacy is much more difficult. So that blind spot quite often is, yeah, well, we did what we said, we have a policy, we did the training, but hey, does it make any difference? So, but again, that's an area for us to get into, because how do you measure it? So
yes, let's talk about that some more, in fact. So when an organization thinks it's got itself covered on privacy, what are those signs that tell you that although they might have the policy in place, they don't have that capability?
Yeah, well, I think it really ties back to the question with Daniel earlier on, that we started seeing incidents coming through if we've got our incident process running correctly and we're categorizing, privacy issues accordingly. So certainly that's the wrong time to measure it. That's like after the gate has been opened, so to speak. Certainly from our point of view, and then we're going to get into this later on, is actually looking at how your roles are defined and whether you've embedded, and how you're measuring your people against the expectation of a role and the privacy that's embedded within it. I won't go into too much detail on that. I'm sure we'll cover it later on, but actually documenting what privacy looks like in your organization at a role level.
I'll follow on from it. I think it's worth noting that few organizations that aren't either large or have a specific requirement have jobs specifically targeted to privacy. So it's usually an extra responsibility for a range of people. So it's not necessarily, do you have X number of privacy experts or do you have a legal expert? It actually can be seen in things like the distribution of skills. So there are 1 or 2 people with the skills for information management and information and data compliance. Or actually, are we seeing that spread across different teams, perhaps at different levels, with expertise in one team, but lower level skills in others? So that's something we would definitely see coming through, is actually, are we relying on just 1 or 2 people? That would be a good sign that you've probably got the policies in place, probably written by those 1 or 2 people. And then the implementation is perhaps lacking, but ticked off because we've done the training, as Paul said.
Yeah. And how do you think leaders take that next step and build on that, Daniel, and get into creating privacy as a proper workforce capability, rather than just as being that training tick box that you mentioned?
I'd go right back to, why do you care about privacy? So I think there are lots of different reasons why organizations might care about privacy. So compliance is certainly one, and it's a very important one. But certainly it can be something that enhances your brand reputation. It can be being a good corporate citizen and actually meeting your client or your customer's expectations. That's incredibly important. That becomes a relationship management feature. So if you can actually get what's the underlying reason why we as a business care, then get your senior leaders on board, and then actually take a look at what's the capability we need. And then we can go to, well, how much of that capability do you already have? What's the gap? How do we build that? And then, of course, we're always going to move into how do we change people's work on an everyday basis so privacy becomes something that is routinely considered and routinely factored into process decisions, design decisions, and so on.
Paul, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, it sort of follows on, and not unsurprisingly. I suppose the angle that I come at, and this is like a bit of a broader conversation in terms of the world we're in around skill-based sort of mentalities. Quite often, we see the word privacy or equivalent within a job title, rather than, as Daniel was saying, sort of spread out across the organization, and privacy being a component of many of the roles that we perform. I think also the drivers there, again, there's a little bit of a cultural thing, but if you look at it at a personal level, what would I want people to do with my data, and who should be able to see it, and why do they see it, and such like, and apply that when you're involved in decisions around other people's private data, then we're starting to build that right mentality. But having said all of that, one of the things that we've started to see in some of our clients is where they are, let's go back to what you said earlier, actually, Marianne, taking it seriously. So putting in specific roles, but their job is to propagate through other roles, if you will. So they've got the authority and responsibility, but that is not just that it stays with them, it actually gets dissipated. I know that sounds a little bit abstract, but, in terms of defining it in a job role, it's, linking privacy maybe into a DevOps role because you're designing a software system, and, privacy needs to be designed in, day one. So,
yeah, let's talk a little bit more about those different types of privacy roles. Actually, that's often a key distinction for people. So, can you help us distinguish privacy roles that are focused on privacy from privacy tasks that are embedded in non-privacy roles that many people might have? Paul, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I can use the skills taxonomy really to tease this out a little bit, so like a data protection officer, we take, quite a lot of organizations have got that as a role somewhere. Our chief operating officer performs that role as part of her overall responsibility. And within that, there will be very, very specific skills, around being able to put policy together, and, the skills that are actually defined that is specific to someone that is a specialist. So, we're getting sort of t-shirt roles. When we drop that down into roles that, don't necessarily have that obvious privacy piece, it almost becomes, and we use a terminology called attribute, which is like where you're building a specialism against a particular skill. And, the example that I was giving before, and it can be any of them, particularly around, our world where we're developing solutions and systems that, we design privacy in a day one, and that becomes a specialism for someone, let's say, doing software design or system design or programming. But not necessarily everybody. You've got your champion that really understands it, that works closely with the specialist. And they're the one in their team that is, and the other one that we were discussing a little while back, like testing. Actually, we have people that will test for functionality and all the cool things, and does it look nice, and buttons are in the right place and everything like that. Dumbing it down a little bit, of course. But then specifically somebody that's got the skill of testing, but with a privacy lens. And that is just a flavor of the skill, if you use that terminology.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's certainly some of our clients are actually in that space now where privacy becomes part of that attribute of the skill.
Yeah. Daniel, why do you think the distinction is so important between those privacy-specific roles and privacy tasks that are part of non-privacy roles?
Well, I think that's the difference between having accountable officers or senior execs and actually making it happen every single day. So you can have your chief privacy officer, your data protection officer, your legal advisor. You might have a program manager to implement a privacy program or take a step forward in terms of improving privacy. But then we have to have, Paul's mentioned it, privacy by design. So that has to be embedded into design practices. We need architectural standards that actually mean that we are checking for and enforcing that. It needs to come through in data management and data models. But then it also has to come into business processes. I was thinking about an example where I was working with a major retailer putting in a major change to how they handle credit cards, which is a pretty obvious privacy issue. Some of the senior leaders couldn't quite get their head around why do we care, because we don't capture the whole credit card anyway. We only capture a piece of it, and that's good for them so they know which banks or credit card issuers their customers are using. But when I put it in terms of, well, if you lost all the records for your reward scheme, what's that going to mean? And suddenly the marketing team woke up and said, whoa, that's a major reputational issue. Our customers would never come back and trust us again. It would take forever to build back that trust. And now the marketing team are much better about communicating and talking about how do we need to do things, why does it matter, and then actually getting them behind how do we embed change was really interesting. So again, it's something I said earlier, which is we see privacy through the lens we're most familiar with. So in an IT space, we're often familiar with systems and data, but we're not so familiar with information or with things like brand and business impact. So that, I think that's another important lens too. And I put that into when you're building or designing systems or changes. We don't just need the technical people involved. We also need people involved from the business who understand what that means for them. That's a good design principle anyway, but to Paul's point, we also need those people to understand privacy and understand a little bit about design so they can work with the designers too.
Yeah, it does get interesting, doesn't it, that, Daniel, especially these days. I mean, just as a general thing, I mean, my goodness, we give our private data away so easily these days. It's, so to try and bring that into the organizational context that we have responsibilities for other people's, private data, when every day, the social media sites know more about us than our mothers do, it's pretty crazy. Having said that, I think everything that we've been discussing here, to actually have visibility and to document what it is you expect down at a skill level and roles that have got the responsibility and the authority and they carry the can, is a good sign when we look in an organization. If we can see those types of roles, rather than just hope it works, it's a good sign that they are at least got the right starting point, for sure.
Marianne, you talked about other measures that help us see, and there are certain skills we can look for in distribution, but there's a process one that would come through here, and what Paul just said just triggered me on that. If you look at who conducts, say, privacy impact assessments in an organization, if you find it's just one person in this team because they're the nominated privacy expert, great that you've got one. That one person can't possibly know all things. So I really would like to see that actually privacy impact assessments have people from different domains involved, even if they end up agreeing with each other, but to provide different lenses on privacy and what that means for the organization, what it means for the system, what it means for the customer or the client whose data you've got in there. I think that's a good, healthy sign that we're not relying on one or two people to wear the privacy hat.
Yeah, it's I really like the idea of brand reputation. That gets attention, doesn't it? It's such an important thing that most of clients, including public sector, want to protect. They want people to trust that they can do the right thing. And obviously, we've got a slightly different context here, and we've got some good privacy laws in our part of the world, but you look at Europe and they take it to another level, and mainly to keep people honest that capture your data because that's their business. But we capture people's data. Data is our business, and so certainly one thing that we try to do is, the mentality would be a small target. So only collect the absolute minimum of private data that you need. And other things that would be cool, you got to take that decision. Yeah, does that really make a difference to the client in terms of the data quality that we're providing, or is it something interesting that we could put a white paper together against? No, Daniel will know where I'm coming from with stuff like that. So
yeah, that's the exchange you were talking about with social media sites. How much do you want to give over in order to get access to the functionality? But you don't have a huge choice, although you can put controls on your social media accounts, but you kind of have to engage and hand over lots of information to participate. If you're carrying out a skills assessment, we really don't need to know every last thing about you. We need a name, we need an email, we need to know about your skills, but we don't need to go and collect tons of personal information for that, which is why we don't ask for it.
Let's get more into that in terms of what that good type of skills visibility, skills data looks like. So, Paul, what do you think that good quality skills data looks like for privacy? What's the minimum you would want leaders to be able to see?
Yeah, again, I made some notes about this, and I think that transparency is a big part of it. And I've got an example, obviously, won't name who it is. One of our customers right now is going through this, where they've got to focus on privacy and they're documenting the roles. So we can see those very clearly in the specialist skills. And back to Daniel's point, that they're multi-domain. It isn't like one person at the top that's covering everything. They'll have privacy in different business units, but almost the same sort of title. So there'd be privacy where it relates to, say, HR and employees, and privacy where it relates to customers or suppliers even. And those are defined using the skills that are, we won't go through them, but plenty of skills within the SFIA framework that are privacy, sort of security and data related. And then the next level down is, again, we touched on it before, I was touching on it, was having that propagation that across pretty much all your organization, there's a privacy lens, and having that scattered across. So the role in itself might not appear to be a privacy role, but there's a perspective within it. So, whether you're, leading the test team, whether you're in program management or, process design or whatever it might be, that we've got that extra, I sometimes call it flavor. The real name is a skill attribute in our terminology, but that extra domain knowledge against the skill. Like there's a skill called specialist advice, like how many times is part of that you've got the privacy lens. So if someone needs to know, you're the person with the skill that can offer advice on privacy, data protection, whatever it might be. So that ultimately is something we can slice and dice through the analytics. Does this organization have privacy running through their roles? Pretty simple, yes or no. Now, of course, it goes a lot further than that in terms of, does that result in, the right culture, the right mindset? But it's a damn good starting point, that's for sure.
And how do you think leaders are limited when they don't have that kind of visibility?
Completely. I mean, it's almost wishing a prayer, really. If you haven't got it, you might, but you've nothing there to say you do. So, we live in a world of delta. These are the things we expect we should be doing compared to these are the things we can actually do. So if you haven't already set your to be, what do we need people to be able to perform, usually in the form of roles and jobs, not always, but usually, then we've got a very clear, we can take that privacy slice through the data and say, wow, you really do have some blind spots. You've got one person that can do that thing in your whole organization. You should have 6. So, ultimately that's, data playing its role, and just really taking that one step a little bit further. And, And this again is a little bit of a mindset. Most solutions allow people to see data that belongs to someone else. You know, if I'm a manager or a leader, I can see the skills and gaps and training plans of my people. But then there's, you know, that you've really got to ask who needs to see it and why they need to see it. So building relationships that are solid, you know, only the right people can. And then this is going to be the slightest little twist, and it might put a smile on your faces. We've got a little feature in there that says, see my leaders, or words to that effect. And if you've got a good attitude, every employee should be able to see who it is that can see their data in my world. But it's surprising, quite a lot do not want that switching on. And it's like, yeah, well, you know, that's sort of a bit of an indicator. There might be good reasons for it. You know, I don't know really any that jump to mind, but there might be. Maybe Daniel can think of some. But yeah, why can't I see who can see what I, you know, what I've put in there? It seems like a nice balanced approach to privacy to me. The ultimate what good looks like there, Marianne.
And how about mapping some of those skills? So Daniel, how would you suggest that SFIA mapping helps highlight those capability blind spots more quickly than some of the more traditional approaches?
Well, I think partly we have the skills already defined in SFIA. So quite a few people have lent some expertise and their experience to help refine some of the skills in there. Some are quite new. So we do actually have a skill specifically around information and data compliance. I contributed quite a bit to helping write that skill. But for a long time, we've had skills like information management. Recently, we pulled record management out of that, recognizing it's not quite the same thing. Data management and information security skills. And those have been refined and updated with each version of SFIA to recognize that actually privacy is a dimension that people who are involved in security or information management or data management do need to be thinking about. So we've got descriptions that say this is what we expect people with this skill at this level to be doing. Are you actually doing it? Because if you're not, you haven't got the skill, or you're not demonstrating the skill at the very least. So that's, I think the first thing is we have a measure of what do we expect people to be doing. There's another bit too, and I'll dive into just a little bit of what's in SFIA. We have now behavioral attributes. So we have one called security, privacy, and ethics. And this is very much about making sure we have the protection of sensitive information, upholding privacy, demonstrating ethical conduct with how you work with your system, with your colleagues inside and outside the organization. That's a behavior. It's not a skill. That's something we expect people at every level in the organization to embed. It looks different at different levels, but if you've got a leader who's doing the bare bones basics of that, that's a behavior that's not coming through. I can tell you that's going to have a knock-on impact in terms of how their team and how the teams around them get to work. So we can look specifically for skills, and we've got descriptors that say this is what we expect to see, or this is what we expect you to be doing. But we can also go and check the behaviors too. So I think that's much better than saying a traditional approach. Do we have a privacy expert? Do we have a person to point at? Do we have a chief privacy officer or a data protection officer that's named? Sure you do, great. But is it part of people's behaviors? That's what we're always going to come down to.
That is absolutely spot on, Daniel. Again, it reminds me of one of our government clients, and when they're defining roles, that's almost the first thing they go to is those. And there's a few others that sort of interweave there, but certainly that behavior around security and the ethics, and set quite high, even for lower level roles, because the data that they manage and hold on behalf of the citizens is unbelievably sensitive. So, yeah, I think that's made a huge difference. And measuring it's a little bit interesting, but I think back to your point, Daniel, at least it's there defined, in a language that's consistent. And we've set out what we expect. So at least we've got that in place. And then, of course, many different ways of us measuring against that. So
That setting of expectations is absolutely critical. That's one of the first parts in setting the culture right, is actually saying, this is what we expect. So great to see an organization that says, do you know what? This is who we are. This is how we want to behave. These are our expectations of you, and the expectations are high. And this is what that looks like. That's absolutely awesome, because that's how you begin to hold people to account. Having a loose or a vague expectation of you should generally follow privacy rules and laws doesn't really tell people what to do or how to behave, or set an expectation that people should have to live up to. So I love seeing that. That's great.
Could I just follow on a little bit there? And this is just something that crops up every now and again. So I'm sort of throwing a question here, Daniel, but just to share some ideas. If we look at, personal privacy, so we take some of the requirements in GDPR, and one of those is the right to be forgotten completely. Yeah, I want every bit of everything you ever knew about me, and I want it gone, right? Including tell me everything you know about me before you get rid of it all. But then if we apply that in an employment context, so maybe thinking about your own organization, and we design that into a solution. So there's a little button there that says, I want to be forgotten. But how does that interwork or interplay with like an employment contract that you've got your workforce in the system, they're going to hit a button and all the data disappears, and now you no longer know what that employee does. I'd just be interested. It's just one of those that crops up every now and again, and it's like, yeah, I'm not too sure where I land on it. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've seen some organizations do this well, and as part of their employment contract or as an addendum that they have a policy around this that is a requirement that you accept, is that we have the right to hold the information necessary about you and your work. So if it's necessary that we know about your skills, which seems like a pretty reasonable thing for an employer to know about their people, then that would be covered through that. I certainly see lots of organizations where there's just an assumption that we can collect data about employees. That's not okay in so many scenarios.
Yeah.
Yet it's just accepted, rightly or wrongly. Legislation is different in every country. I'm not a legal expert, but certainly being clear with your employees and just being transparent around, we will collect this kind of information, and this is why we collect it. This is what it's going to be used for. We're always back to privacy principles, treating your employees like humans who have rights, and not just inanimate people who get stuff done. I think that's right back to privacy principles. In New Zealand, our privacy commissioner actually sets out 13 principles that help organizations do well by the privacy laws. Really easy to follow, really good guidance. They actually have some great training on it too, which is awesome. But again, it's back to why are we collecting it? What's the purpose? Do we have a right to? That's the employee agreed. So if it's entirely voluntary and employees opt out, we get employees who don't want to go through skills assessments, or don't want to share their skills with their manager. Where employers let that happen, effectively, you're saying to your employee, you can opt out of all these other schemes that we put in place to help you advance. So if you don't want us to help you, cool, opt out.
Yeah.
But you're not required to opt in, and I think that's fair. So
give me a reason to opt in. I like it. You know what I mean? It's again, this is back to how much do you give away for what you get back in return. It just was to say we sometimes have these conversations, and I sort of the back of my mind realised that ultimately it does come down to the engagement that you have. It gets really quite interesting when you bring contractors in, but we're not going there. That's for another time. Yes.
Yeah, HR professionals will be very well versed with the idea that you do need to have some sensible controls on what you collect about people. That's embedded into the HR practice. We don't have that quite so well embedded in how we learn about IT. Maybe that's something we need to improve on as a general idea. But yeah, it's back to first principles. What are you collecting? Why? What's the purpose? What are you going to do with it?
Let's talk about what they do with that on an ongoing basis. So, Paul, once you've got some of that data and you're tracking your privacy capability over time, why is that useful and important to do it over a period of time rather than just as a one-off?
Yeah, it's right time, right place mentality. Certainly one of the mindsets that we have, and it's driven by my days as an ITIL trainer. So apologies for dragging that up, but I cannot count how many people were sat in a room in front of me looking at me blankly because they'd been sent on an ITIL course, because we do ITIL, rather than taking that step back and saying, what is the skill you need in appropriate to your role, and more importantly, when do you need it? Because having training 10 months in advance and needing it, so having that visibility of, we need people to do these things, it's got that privacy lens on it, this is where you're at currently, and then you can deliver learning and development on a needs basis that can be immediately employed back in the workforce at that next level of getting the practice and building up your competency, and that is never ending. I mean, we talk about lifelong learning, all these types of things these days, but the ability to prioritize and deliver it at the right time is, well, it's just good use of time, money, anything else you can think of, really. So that'd be my take on it.
Daniel, what do you think the impact of that is when leaders have access to that?
Well, I think showing the improvement over time is part of the justification on the training and the effort that's put into the programs that are put in place, and the learning and the courses that are made available to people. So if that's not improving anything, that's a very poor return on investment. Stop doing that. Find something better to do is what a leader should be thinking about. So I think capturing the skills data is really useful. I would also say capture business outcomes. Having the skills by themselves don't give you the outcomes you're looking for. They are a leading indicator that you could produce the outcomes you're looking for, and certainly they're often a prerequisite to getting there. So it's a good sign that you move in the right direction, but you then also need to couple that with, are you getting the business outcomes you're looking for? That might be, we've been through X number of changes and our internal audit has not revealed any new privacy issues that have come out of the changes that we've made. Measuring it based on instance is pretty poor, but that's sort of base level 0 to start measuring from. But actually checking, did we follow the process? Did we do the proactive things to make sure we have privacy embedded by design in our processes, in our tools? And actually checking for those proactively through internal audit would be a really good way to go. And actually that will show you're working towards the outcomes you're looking for.
And looking at that from more of a governance level, what would you recommend that boards and governance level executives should be asking for in terms of signals that they've got the right privacy capability in the organisation?
Yeah, that's an interesting one without having board members sort of get into the nitty-gritty of the skills reports. But I think, do we have the policies? Are we being followed? Are they actually being followed? And how do we know they're being followed is a really good sign. I would also want to say, so how do we make sure we've got this capability? And are we building it if we didn't already have it? And that should come out of some high-level reporting out of the skills data. I think from a pure governance point of view, I don't want our directors and board really getting into the nitty-gritty of every last skill, but certainly showing, hey, actually, we needed to improve in this domain. 7 out of 9 people have developed the skill the way they said, and those people are now involved in more of our programs of work. We have more trust in what they do. Oh, and actually, the internal audit results show that too. Those are really good signals.
Yeah, I almost the exact, but with just tipping it the other way in terms of the board side of it, and it's more the GRC, which is doing. Certainly looking for the improvements and have we got it, but actually doing the risk side of it, which is, this is what we expect. This is what our organization should look like from a skills and privacy capability point of view. What is the gap? because quite often that then results in, now we need some money, or we need to stand up a project or whatever it might be to address it. And going back to what I said very early, one of our clients that's implementing this, I'm pretty sure that's where it came from. Probably one of the big four ran through there and said, oh my goodness. And it's like, okay, right now, let's bring it back to brass tacks. Let's look at it from capabilities across a workforce. And I say, as Daniel said, it's a leading indicator. You've now got to prove you're actually doing it. But if you don't know what you're doing in the first place, you can be pretty damn sure you're not doing it. So, yeah, that just the, almost the red, amber, green against skills that are privacy related as a gap analysis.
I think back to my time working and recovering projects and programs of work. One of the first questions I would ask before I even started using tools like SFIA was, when we set out on this piece of work, or when you set out on this piece of work, did you carry out any kind of evaluation to see if you have the capabilities to deliver this? Or did you just assume all the people who are involved magically had the skills? And the number of times we get, we thought about that, but it was too hard to do. We didn't know how to do it. And then the outcome was we kind of fudged along and eventually we couldn't get it done. So we had to spend some extra money to bring in some experts or people with more experience. We could have done it at the beginning and done it for a fraction of the cost. That comes up so often in failed projects and programs, well outside of the privacy space. But as a generic thing, it's actually good project and program management practice. But I think from an organizational planning point of view, if you have plans you want to introduce, you should be thinking, do we as an organization have the capabilities, both people, process, and technology? Have an honest assessment about where you are right now, and then look at what the cost of implementing the programs to build the new tool, to build the new people skills, to build the new processes, or a combination of those actually are. And that's about building organizational capability. And that in turn might impact what things you want to invest in, what programs of work you want to do, because we don't have the capability and it's too expensive to build it. Or actually, it turns out it was easier than we thought, because we do actually have the capability and we find that people have got hidden skills, but we didn't have a way of knowing that. There's some, having that skills data and having an honest view on what your organizational capability is across people, process, and technology. And using that to inform decision making, I think is just good decision making, and that of course leads to a principle of good governance.
Thanks, Daniel. And just to close off our conversation today, I'm keen to hear from both of you. What is one action you can each think of that a leader in this space can take right away to start reducing their privacy risk by improving their capability? Paul, let's hear from you first.
This is going to be quite general, because obviously there'll be various people listening to this, but I would give the skills framework for the information age a really good look at. It's got some fantastic, well-defined skills around privacy and data protection and the other aspects that we've been discussing, just so you've got a common language to look at. Now, if you're already using SFIA, then I'd be saying start looking at or defining your requirements around privacy. But the starting point would be to use a taxonomy that's really got all you need within it. I can't believe we got away without talking about AI. That's all I'm going to say about it. Over to you, Daniel.
Daniel, how about you? What's one action you think leaders in the space can take right away to start making a difference to privacy through their capability?
Yeah, 100% behind what Paul said there. Using a framework like SFIA that has a taxonomy that sets the expectations, use that to guide that. That's absolutely incredibly important. I might just step one step backwards and just mention that SFIA thinks about skills in terms of what can you do, not what do you know. So I would be thinking about when you're training people to understand privacy, it's not the understanding bit, that's the knowledge. It's training them on what are they going to do with that new knowledge they have about privacy, or or that little top up they've had on a rule change or a law change. Make sure you're focusing your training on what do I expect people to do, and not just giving them knowledge. The knowledge is important, but let people know what you need them to do.
That's great. Thank you both. And that brings our discussion today to a close. So thank you very much, Daniel and Paul. This has been a really good and really insightful discussion on privacy and capability. And thank you to our viewers for joining us today. If you would like us to go deeper on a specific privacy challenge and capability challenge, send us your questions. This series is shaped by what leaders and viewers of these webinars want to know. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.